This is reposted.
It's that time of the month again where we're joined by the founder of the How I Got That Way podcast, Brandon Doble. In his most recent episode, he chats with his former nephew who was about to sleep in Golden Gate Park, and it was a pretty interesting conversation. So check out How I Got That Way on anywhere you listen to podcasts. But I got to admit, Brandon, I follow you on social media, and you posted something recently that made me think of this quote, and I want to talk about it. It's from Robert Brault, who's an author, American author. He says, enjoy the little things in life because one day you'll look back and realize they were the big things. And the thing that got me was you had posted you had taken your daughter to a baseball game. And I feel like maybe that'll be a memory you'll remember for the rest of your life. But do you look back and have any big memories that in the moment you thought were small?
Wow, that's great intel right there, Andrew. I appreciate your yeah. I think it's funny. I hadn't even thought about that, but I think you just hit it on the head. That is exactly this quote. You can spend your whole life thinking about, well, when this happens or when that. I mean, this is obviously a little bit of a cliche is not the right word, but people often be like, oh, I just try to live in the moment. Larry and I talked about this a couple weeks ago. Oh, I just try to live in the moment. I try to live. It's like it is so hard to live in the moment when you're thinking about your job and paying bills and your kids and all the stuff that of life. And so you're just trying to get things done. But to just take a second every once in a while to stop and think about really what's it all about. So to me, that's what that quote spoke to me about. Is like saying, recognize in that moment, like at the baseball game with your kid, that it doesn't get any better than that. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe some people are bummed that that's as good as it gets. I don't know, but I think about like things that happen as when you're a little kid, and I tell Maple, my daughter, all the time about like, oh, when I was a little boy, we would do this or do that, and she's like, oh, tell me more. And I'm sure all parents go through that, but those are important moments in your life. So I don't know. I mean, does that make sense what I'm babbling about there?
Yeah.
I mean, literally, the little things become big things in that you have a little kid and then they become the big kid. And in there, we kind of like, I mean, I'm like my kids are just out of my littlest one is just about not a little kid anymore. I'm like ready to lose him into like, he's not my little guy anymore. And it just happens like that. And you kind of miss that. They become the big things, the little ones.
Yeah. I think because I'm an older parent, honestly, I always reflect on that about she's going to be this age just for a blink of an eye. I mean, I think, wisdom is not being smarter. It's just having more kind of road under your feet. And I think what allows me to think like that is recognizing that I look back on my life and I remember, oh, wow, that was 30 years ago now. I can't believe that was X, years ago. And then so you can reflect on the fact that your kid's born and then you're going to turn around and it's going to be 20 years later. And they're off and whatever. Like Larry, your daughter, Brennan just got her black belt in karate. I can just remember her starting karate, which feels like 2 minutes ago. And so it just, I mean, it's funny. I was reflecting on when your kids were born, Larry, that because when Brennan got the black belt, I was like, wow, I can literally remember when she was in a swaddling cloth and when she pooped down the back of her dress. Like those are, we were sitting outside of a coffee shop and she pooped all down her dress. I'm sure she just wouldn't want to hear that, but those are the powerful moments in life, I think, far more than probably any professional successes. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I think some professional successes are really good and they can be meaningful, but I think you can miss the forest for the trees if you're not careful.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for me, I don't have kids, but that like can be highlighted in that like if you plan a trip to go somewhere, it's going to be epic. Like all of us have gone specifically to go to a football game. Like I went to a football game with Brandon in Colorado. And I think the strongest memories I have are not from the main event that you go for. It's the little things that you do around it and leading up to it that are more memorable. And so I think a lot of people can get caught up with it needs to be the perfect event. It needs to be the perfect whatever. But if you actually look back on something you plan, it's not the thing. That's just what puts it in motion.
Huh, that's a great another Andrew. You're on your A game today because that's another great example of like I remember going to the tea house in Boulder, and my buddies still make fun of me for wanting to go to the tea house, but I love tea houses. I think they're really cool, and that was probably the highlight of my entire trip. Although Boulder is beautiful, and I've been there several times, but that trip, and I can remember the game, and I remember doing certain things, drinking Scorpion Bowls or whatever. But
Ooh.
But the tea house was the highlight. So I think that the one struggle I had with this quote a little bit was he was saying the little things become the big things. That was sort of the philosophical twist on that of like, well, was going to the tea house the big thing? Or was it just the thing that's just reminding you to remember to take in everything? Like, don't be so caught up in like something happening down the road that you miss that's the joyful moment of your like what today are each of us going to do that's going to be meaningful in this day? Is it going to be the work we did, or the project we're trying to finish, or is it going to be, I don't know, skateboarding with your kid, or doing an improv class, or I don't know, just whatever that is. You can, those things can be far more important than the project or the promotion or whatever.
Thank you for bringing the spiritual part into this, Brandon. One of my historical favorite people, spiritual people, is Juliana Norwich. She was in like the 1300s or so. She was big for having these visions of God. In one of her most famous visions of God, God put a hazelnut in her hand and said, "It is all that it is created." Like, he didn't do some big giant thing. He just put a hazelnut in her hand and said, "This is it. This is everything." And I have really taken that, like, that tiny, like, if God speaks to you, he's just saying, look at the tiniest thing. That's it. So you could go to the Grand Canyon and stare at it, or just go outside and stare at a daffodil. I feel like that's the point. You could stare at a daffodil just as long as you could stare at the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, it's funny you saying that about the Julian and Norwich. I know you guys think I'm blowing sunshine up your ass, but like I literally listen to Reposted podcast every day after I drop Maple off, and I often think about like the little nugget I get from I always feel like I should come on and we shouldn't have a quote, but we should talk about the 30 shows or 29 shows before this where I've had thoughts about, because there's not a show where I'm not like, oh, wait a second, what about this? But you talked about buying the heavy vest, and that walking was like and it really stuck with me, just about like, am I sort of focusing outwards too much, as opposed to like, just buy a heavy vest that's better for you than doing X, Y, or Z. I don't know. It was just, you guys were talking about that idea of walking versus running, or, I think we get caught up into so many different things. So I feel like I should just give you my little things about about the Reposted podcast over the last month. But it is that point of like, what's right in front of you is what's important. So if I take something from the podcast on my way home from dropping Maple off at school, that might be the one thing of the whole day that's the most important thing. And again, not necessarily because of the Reposted, but just it made me think, and that's important. So there you have it.
And I think one more example of like the little things being big, I think especially with kids, again, not a parent, but like your kids will probably remember something that you didn't even think, like you won't even register. I'm sure there's things I specifically remember with my parents that they didn't think twice of, and you don't know what's going to stick. And so it's the little things can affect people in different ways that you won't ever know.
Yep.
Yes. One fun thing about Robert Brault is I saw, this is unsubstantiated, but he is allegedly quoted every 7 minutes every day on Twitter. He's used every 7. That's what his Google Reads thing said. But
who is he?
He's just an author. He wrote a book called Round Up the Usual Subjects, Thoughts on Just About Everything. I think it's a kind of a collection of thoughts. But better than that book is the How I Got That Way podcast. Check out Brandon's podcast. Thanks for joining us again this month. Hopefully you come back next month. I'm Andrew for Larry and Brandon. Thanks for stopping by.